lot of you watch my channel but haven't subscribed yet. Please subscribe and help me grow. Redditor 1. I've never told anyone this before, but my life has been a tapestry of nightmares woven into the fabric of reality. Even as a toddler, I knew I wasn't like other children. I remember those early nights with a clarity that chills me to this day. I was small, barely tall enough to see over the coffee table, and yet I distinctly recall whispering about visitors who came in the dead of night. While other children had sweet dreams of cartoon characters and bedtime stories, my sleep was punctuated by eerie, uninvited presences. It started with whispers in the dark. I would lie in my crib, eyes wide open in the dim glow of a nightlight, listening to voices I could neither see nor understand. I was convinced that shadowy figures hovered near my crib, their forms indistinct, yet menacing. My family dismissed it as childish fancy, a product of an overactive imagination. But even then I knew that these visitors were real, that they were watching me with a deliberate interest that I could not comprehend. By the time I was 7, the abnormal had become ordinary. I still remember the first time I saw a UFO in broad daylight. It wasn't cloaked in the usual mystery of the night. It appeared as a silvery disk against a clear blue sky, its edges shimmering like a heat haze. I stood frozen on the cracked pavement outside our small suburban home, my heart pounding in a rhythm that seemed to sync with the whirring sound emanating from the craft. In that moment, I realized that my childhood fears were not just figments of an overactive mind. They were harbingers of something far more sinister. Over the years, I began to notice them more often. I would catch fleeting glimpses of unnerving shapes high in the sky, their movements too deliberate to be the random dance of clouds. For the most part, I merely observed them, a silent witness to a spectacle that no one else seemed to notice, except for that one encounter, the one that changed everything. It was a humid summer evening, the kind where the air feels thick and heavy, and the cicadas' chorus never ceases. I had just returned from a late shift at the diner, my body aching and my mind fogged from exhaustion. I had always prided myself on my ability to compartmentalize, to leave the bizarre happenings of my life at the fringes of my consciousness. But that night, as I walked home under the flickering streetlights, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. At precisely 11:03 p.m., as I rounded a deserted block, I sensed something shift in the atmosphere. There was a low, persistent humming sound, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the very ground beneath my feet. I stopped in my tracks, and for a moment, time itself appeared to slow. In the periphery of my vision, a dark shape hovered, too low for comfort. It was as if the boundaries of the sky had been breached by an unwelcome intruder. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and a cold sweat broke out along my temples. I quickened my pace, convinced that I could outrun the inexplicable dread that clung to me like a second skin. But deep down, I knew that escaping was futile. In the following days, I began to experience a kind of sleep paralysis, a waking nightmare that never started with sleep, but rather with the roar of an approaching force. It was as if my consciousness was caught in a battle of wills, with an unseen adversary determined to wrest control of my mind. On many mornings, I awoke to find bruises on my wrists, thin, elongated marks that looked as though they were inflicted by long, narrow fingers. Sometimes, they extended to my pelvic area and thighs, as if the entity had grasped me tightly before dragging me away. The physical pain was real, but it paled in comparison to the terror that accompanied each episode. The sensation of being violated by an unfeeling force left me questioning my own sanity. One such morning remains etched in my memory with agonizing clarity. It was a damp, dismal night, and I had been standing outside in the rain, trying to gather my scattered thoughts after a particularly intense episode. The sky was a relentless gray, and the pitter-patter of raindrops provided a grim soundtrack to my isolation. I recall checking my watch, 11:47 p.m., when a sudden, deafening roar shattered the quiet. It was as if a jet engine had materialized out of thin air, its ferocious sound enveloping me entirely. Before I could react, my legs gave way, and I found myself crumpling onto the rain-soaked pavement. The next moment, I lost all sense of time. I cannot say how long I remained there, paralyzed by fear and confusion. When I finally came to, I was alone in the darkness, the relentless downpour washing away any trace of the encounter. But I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that something had been there with me, something malevolent and beyond understanding. There were nights, too, when the line between sleep and waking blurred into a maddening limbo. I would lie in my room, a space that should have been my sanctuary, only to feel the creeping presence of a figure draped in a black robe. Its silhouette was faint, almost ghostly, and yet its intent was unmistakable. I would fight with every ounce of my being to remain conscious, to avoid slipping into that void where the creature's influence took hold. The struggle was relentless, a battle fought in the shadows of my own mind, and more often than not, I lost. One particular incident stands out, one that defies explanation. It occurred on a night that began like any other, a night cloaked in an unsettling stillness. My bedroom was my refuge, the only room on the high second story of our creaking old house. Heavy curtains should have rendered it pitch black, yet that night an eerie green light permeated the space. I lay there, immobilized, as if trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The first sign of the abnormality was the sudden sound, a low, constant spinning noise that grew louder with each passing second. I felt as though the walls were pulsating, the very air around me thickening with the presence of something otherworldly. Then, inexplicably, I felt a shift. I was no longer confined to the bed. I was floating. My body moved as if controlled by an unseen force, drifting upward until I found myself suspended 2 stories above my bedroom, over the garden below. From this vantage point, I could see through the thin barrier of the wall, my vision piercing through the layers of my own home. I could see my bed below, the familiar contours of the room now alien and distorted by the unnatural green glow. The sensation was both surreal and horrifying. I was fully aware of every detail, the rough texture of the wall, the chill that seeped into my bones, and the oppressive hum of that spinning sound that defied all rational explanation. I remember thinking with a desperate clarity that I was being put back somewhere. The realization struck me in a moment of horrifying lucidity. I was being manipulated, as if my body were nothing more than a puppet in the hands of a cosmic force. I was surrounded by an intense green light that seemed to emanate from nowhere, enveloping me in its spectral embrace. The sound grew louder still, a cacophony that filled every corner of my consciousness, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the ordeal ended. I felt myself being gently lowered back into my room. The green light faded, leaving only the familiar darkness behind. Yet the memory of that light burned into my retinas long after it was gone. For days after that night, I was a prisoner of my own mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, monitored by unseen eyes that tracked my every move. The Greys, the silent, inscrutable beings I had seen throughout my life, seemed to be orchestrating these encounters with a cold, calculated precision. Their presence was always accompanied by a sense of violation, as if they were using us for experiments, or worse, treating us like the expendable creatures we often dismiss in our everyday lives. I tried to explain my experiences to friends and family, but their responses were always the same. "You're overreacting," they would say, dismissing my words as the ramblings of a troubled mind. One friend, after listening to my account of the green light and the floating, looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear, whispering, "Maybe you should see someone about this." But how do you convince someone that you've been haunted by entities from beyond our understanding? How do you explain that you've been marked, touched by forces that show no mercy and have no empathy? I began keeping a meticulous journal, documenting every encounter in excruciating detail. Each entry was a testament to the gradual erosion of my sense of safety. I noted the exact times, 11:00, 11:15, 11:30, as if the progression of minutes might somehow capture the relentless approach of these visitors. I recorded every sensation, the metallic tang of fear on my tongue, the prickling sensation on my skin as if invisible fingers were tracing my every nerve ending. These entries became my lifeline, a fragile thread connecting me to a reality that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. It wasn't long before the encounters began to escalate. The black-robed figure became a regular part of my nightly torments. I learned to recognize its features. A silhouette so indistinct yet filled with malice that I could sense its presence even before I saw it. It would appear at the threshold of my vision, its form shifting and undulating like smoke. I could hear it sometimes, a whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls of my room. "I see you," it would murmur, a phrase that echoed in my mind long after the sound had faded. One particularly harrowing night, I found myself standing outside in the rain yet again, the relentless downpour mirroring the torrent of emotions inside me. I had been waiting for answers, for any sign that the terror would subside. Instead, the darkness offered no reprieve. At precisely 11:42 p.m., as I glanced upward at the stormy sky, I caught sight of a familiar shape, a craft, hovering ominously low above me. It moved with a deliberate slowness, its metallic surface reflecting the intermittent flashes of lightning. I stood frozen, every muscle locked in fear, as the realization dawned on me. These beings were not merely passing by. They were here, interacting with me in ways that defied explanation. As the craft descended, the air around me grew thick with an unnameable pressure. I felt as if I were being squeezed, my lungs struggling for breath. The world around me seemed to blur, the rain transforming into a cascade of shimmering droplets that danced in the eerie light. I could hear the faintest rhythmic pulsing that synchronized with my heartbeat. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again. The black-robed figure, standing at the edge of the clearing, its eyes hidden in the shadow of its hood. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I could only watch in silent terror as the figure raised a hand, its long, narrow fingers almost brushing the rain as if caressing the storm itself. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. I was trapped in a living nightmare, a marionette caught in the cruel play of cosmic forces. The figure's presence was overwhelming, as if it were a physical manifestation of all the fear and despair that had accumulated within me over the years. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the inky blackness. The craft lingered a moment longer before it, too, ascended, leaving me alone in the storm with nothing but the memory of its oppressive presence. I don't know how long I stood there, drenched in rain and terror, until I finally managed to force my trembling legs into motion and run back to the safety of my home. But even as I closed the door behind me, I knew that no physical barrier could keep the Greys at bay. Over the ensuing months, the encounters grew more frequent and more intense. I began to experience episodes during the day as well, a constant gnawing sensation that I was being observed. In the quiet moments between tasks at work, I would catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, a flash of silver, a ripple in the air, a shadow that shouldn't be there. It was as though the Greys were everywhere, their presence woven into the very fabric of my existence. I started to avoid stepping out after dark, fearful that the night would bring with it another assault on my sanity. Sleep, once a refuge from the world's troubles, had become a battleground. Each night I braced myself for the inevitable onslaught of sleep paralysis. I'd lie awake in bed, eyes darting around the darkness, listening for the telltale signs of their approach. My heart would race, each beat a thunderous reminder of my vulnerability. And then, without warning, the familiar roaring sound would erupt, drowning out all other noises. I'd feel the invisible grip of that malevolent force, as if my very will were being sapped away by an unseen entity. One night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I felt that all too familiar weight pressing down on me. I could no longer distinguish between wakefulness and a dream, and in that disorienting limbo, I heard a sound that still haunts me, a spinning, rotating noise that seemed to come from every direction at once. The sound was not mechanical, nor did it resemble anything produced by human hands. It was something otherworldly, a cacophony that defied logic and reason. In the midst of this auditory assault, I began to see shapes, vague outlines of figures that floated in and out of focus. One of them, more defined than the rest, approached slowly. Its form was shrouded in a dark, flowing robe, and though I couldn't see its face, I felt an unyielding sense of malevolence emanating from it. I fought desperately to maintain control, to keep my eyes open, to keep from succumbing to the paralysis that threatened to drag me into oblivion. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to resist, to break free from the grip of these nightmares. I remember the feeling vividly. My muscles strained as if against an invisible force, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. I could almost taste the metallic tang of fear on my tongue, and my thoughts jumbled into incoherent fragments of panic. For what felt like an eternity, I was locked in a silent duel with this faceless tormentor, a battle of wills where the stakes were nothing less than my very soul. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the confrontation ended. The spinning noise ceased, the oppressive weight lifted, and I was left alone with the lingering echoes of my racing heartbeat. In the aftermath, I was left questioning everything I once held to be true. The Greys, as I had come to call them, were no benevolent visitors or curious observers. They were predators, indifferent to the suffering they inflicted. I began to see parallels between their behavior and the way humans treated wildlife, a cruel game of catch and release that left scars both physical and emotional. If these beings had any semblance of empathy, they would have found a way to understand that fear and pain were not mere byproducts of their actions, but the very essence of what made us human. I attempted to piece together the fragments of my encounters, trying to find a pattern or a purpose behind their relentless intrusions. I scoured old journals, revisited childhood memories, and even pored over accounts from others who claimed similar experiences, but each attempt only deepened the mystery. The events were scattered like shards of broken glass across the timeline of my life, each incident isolated yet intrinsically linked to the next. I became obsessed with finding an explanation, a reason behind the inexplicable phenomena that had tormented me for so long. One chilly autumn evening, when the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls and the trees outside swayed with an eerie, almost deliberate rhythm, I decided to confront the darkness head-on. I locked all the doors, shut the heavy curtains, and sat in the living room with a notebook and pen in hand. I vowed to document every detail, every nuance of my experiences in the hope that one day the truth might emerge from the chaos. The minutes ticked by slowly, 11, 5, 11, 10, 11:15, and I felt a growing pressure in the pit of my stomach, as if time itself were conspiring to bring forth another encounter. And then, at 11:17, I heard it, the low, menacing hum that had become all too familiar. I froze, my pen slipping from my grasp and clattering onto the hardwood floor. The sound grew louder, a deep vibration that seemed to resonate within my very bones. My heart pounded in my ears as I strained to see through the darkness beyond the window. There, amidst the shadows of the swaying trees, I saw it, a sleek, metallic shape hovering silently in the night. The craft was unearthly, its surface glinting with a cold, hard light that sent shivers down my spine. For what felt like an eternity, I watched in paralyzed terror as the object hovered, its presence an undeniable assertion of power. I wanted to cry out, to call for help, but no sound emerged from my parched throat. The moments stretched into an eternity until the craft, almost imperceptibly, began to move. It glided upward, disappearing into the inky blackness of the sky as silently as it had appeared. I sank back into my chair, the notebook forgotten on the floor, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. In the weeks that followed, the relentless onslaught of encounters did little to abate my terror. I would sit by the window for hours, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of those elusive beings. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the leaves, became a potential prelude to another visitation. The line between waking life and nightmares blurred to the point where I no longer knew which was which. I became a prisoner in my own home, locked in a constant state of hypervigilance, forever anticipating the next moment when the unearthly would intrude upon my reality. Sometimes, in the quiet aftermath of an encounter, I would catch fleeting glimpses of an otherworldly truth, a moment when the facade of normalcy cracked, revealing the grotesque machinery beneath. I recalled one afternoon years ago when I was walking through a deserted park after a sudden downpour. The puddles on the cracked pavement mirrored the stormy skies above, and I was lost in thought when I noticed a peculiar ripple in one of them. It was as if something beneath the surface was moving, a slow undulation that defied the laws of nature. For a brief, horrifying moment, I believed that I was witnessing an abduction in reverse, an escape of some cosmic entity back into our world. I never learned what that ripple meant, but it added to the growing tapestry of inexplicable phenomena that had defined my existence. Over time, The once distant memories of my childhood encounters morphed into a continuous, nightmarish present. I could no longer separate the innocent whispers of a toddler from the calculated intrusions of these beings. They had become an inescapable part of who I was, a constant reminder that the universe harbored dark, indifferent forces that cared little for human life. In moments of rare reprieve, when the terror seemed to momentarily ebb away, I would sit alone in the dim glow of my living room and wonder about the nature of fate. Was I merely a hapless observer, destined to be caught in the crossfire of cosmic experiments? Or was there some deeper reason, some secret message encoded in the recurring patterns of these abductions? The questions tormented me, each one a ghostly echo of the uncertainty that pervaded every facet of my existence. There were nights when I would dream of a place far removed from this ceaseless torment, a world where the sky was clear and the stars shone without malice. In these dreams, I would wander through endless fields under a benevolent moon, feeling the soft caress of a gentle breeze. But as soon as I awoke, reality would crash back in. I would find myself in my bed, heart pounding, the remnants of the dream dissolving like mist under the harsh light of day. Those fleeting moments of false relief only served to heighten the subsequent terror as I was reminded that the escape was always just an illusion. One particularly bitter winter, when the nights were long and the cold seeped into the marrow of my bones, I experienced an encounter that defied even the twisted logic of my previous episodes. I had been out walking, trying to clear my mind of the constant barrage of fears and memories. The city was unusually quiet, the usual hum of traffic replaced by the distant sound of a train on an abandoned track. I stopped by a small park, its once vibrant leaves now reduced to brittle, frost-covered remnants on the ground. As I stood there, lost in thought, the silence was shattered by a low, mechanical roar. I turned to see a strange, pulsating light emerging from the tree line, a sickly green glow that bathed everything in an unholy luminance. The light seemed to bleed into the darkness, drawing me forward with an irresistible pull. Before I could comprehend what was happening, I was enveloped by that unnatural radiance. The world around me blurred, and I felt my body lifting from the ground, as if gravity itself had been suspended. I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of detachment, as if I were observing myself from a distance, caught in the midst of a surreal, cosmic abduction. I floated upward, the green light intensifying, until I found myself suspended in midair, with no discernible direction or destination. The only sound was that incessant rotating hum, echoing in the empty void around me. It was in that moment I understood. I was not being taken as a prisoner, but rather as a specimen in a vast, indifferent experiment. Time lost all meaning as I drifted there, my mind swirling with a cocktail of terror and disbelief. When I finally regained some semblance of awareness, I found myself being lowered gently back to the ground. I landed on a patch of damp grass, the cold seeping into my skin, and I struggled to piece together the fragments of what had just occurred. The green light receded as mysteriously as it had come, leaving behind nothing but the lingering echo of that unearthly sound. I staggered back home, each step heavy with the weight of realization. There was no escaping the truth anymore. The Greys were not benevolent visitors or mere observers. They were forces of nature, ancient and inscrutable, whose motives were as opaque as the void between the stars. Their touch left physical marks on my body, mental scars that time would never erase. They treated us as nothing more than anomalies, caught in an involuntary cycle of capture and release, subject to experiments that defied moral or ethical consideration. Now, as I write these words in the dim light of another stormy night, I am painfully aware that my life has been a series of aberrant moments, strung together by the hands of an unseen puppeteer. Every bruise, every sleepless night, every whispered warning in the dead of night, each is a testament to the relentless cruelty of these beings. The memories of those early encounters, from the innocent yet horrifying visits of my toddler years to the brutal abductions that have marked my adulthood, are intertwined in a narrative of perpetual terror. I have tried to seek solace in explanations. Perhaps it was a malfunction of my mind, a psychological anomaly. But the evidence is undeniable. The marks on my skin, the lost time, the overpowering sensations of weightlessness and dread are too concrete, too real to be dismissed as hallucinations. The universe, it seems, is far more hostile and indifferent than we are willing to admit. The cosmos is teeming with forces that exist beyond our comprehension, and I have been an unwilling participant in their grand, unfathomable design. Tonight, as the wind howls outside and the rain pounds against the window panes, I feel that familiar chill creeping over me. I keep the lights low as if to ward off the darkness that might spill in from the edges. Every creak of the old house, every rustle in the trees sends a shiver down my spine. I know that somewhere out there, beyond the veil of our mundane existence, the Greys are watching, waiting for the next moment when they can slip through the cracks of our reality. I have come to realize that there is no safe haven in this world, not in the comforting embrace of home, not in the fleeting moments of daylight, and certainly not in the fragile sanctuary of sleep. The terror is omnipresent, a constant reminder that I am marked, that my life is inextricably linked to these dark cosmic forces. And as I sit here, pen in hand, trying to capture the indescribable horror of it all, I can't help but wonder, will the nightmare ever truly end? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in the endless expanse of the night sky, a realm where the stars themselves seem indifferent to our suffering. Or maybe it is within me, in the deep recesses of my soul, where the echoes of each encounter resonate like a dark symphony. All I know is that every time I close my eyes, I can still see that sickly green light, still hear the relentless spinning sound, and still feel the cold, unyielding grip of those inhuman hands. I have tried to live a semblance of a normal life, clinging to the routines that once defined me. I go to work, I meet with friends, though they speak little of the horrors I recount, and I try with all my might to convince myself that tomorrow might bring a reprieve. But deep down, I know that there is no escaping the truth. The Greys are a part of my destiny, a dark thread woven into the tapestry of my existence, and every moment of false normalcy is simply a prelude to another encounter, another surge of terror that reminds me of the fragility of my own humanity. Even now, as I write this, I can feel the echo of their presence lurking in the shadows. A subtle shift in the air, a distant hum that grows louder when I am most alone. It is as if they are waiting, biding their time until the next moment, when I am vulnerable enough for them to reclaim what they have always desired. And in that moment of inevitable contact, all the carefully constructed illusions of safety will shatter, leaving me to confront the terrible, inescapable truth of a universe that harbors horrors beyond our wildest nightmares. I don't know if anyone will ever believe my story. I don't even know if I can believe it myself some days, as the memories blur with the present and the boundaries between dream and reality dissolve into darkness. All I have are the scars, both visible and hidden, the relentless whisper of that black-robed figure and the haunting promise that the terror will never truly end. So tonight, as the storm rages outside and I listen to the rain drum on the roof, I offer this confession to the silent void. I am haunted. I have been forever marked by encounters that defy logic, by forces that care not for the frailty of human life. I am a testament to the cruelty of a cosmos that sees us as nothing more than fleeting experiments, disposable and insignificant. And though I tremble with every memory, I write these words in the hope that one day someone might understand the true extent of the darkness that surrounds us. For now, I wait in the uneasy stillness between heartbeats, listening for that inevitable sound, the roar, the spin, the eerie murmur that signals the return of the inhuman. I know that somewhere beyond the veil of ordinary existence, they are watching. I know that soon enough, the cycle will begin anew, and I will once again be pulled into the abyss. And so I continue to live, every moment tinged with the dread of what may come, every night haunted by the echo of those long, unyielding encounters. I have no answers, only the unrelenting, oppressive certainty that I am never truly alone. The Greys have made me their unwilling chronicler, their subject, and perhaps, in some unfathomable way, their chosen witness to the cruelty of an indifferent universe. I am left to wonder if there will ever be a day when the terror recedes, when the night no longer hides the sinister secrets of the cosmos. But until that day, I remain here, caught between the fragile light of hope and the overwhelming darkness of my own reality, forever marked by a lifetime of abduction and dread. And as I sit here, writing these final words in the dim glow of my lamplight, I hear it once more, a faint, distant hum that signals the approach of another encounter. My heart clenches, my body tenses, and I know that the cycle is not yet broken. The darkness is coming, and with it, the unyielding presence of the grays, ready to reclaim the night. Redditor 2. I've never been one to trust the dark. As a child, I would huddle under my blankets, eyes wide open, imagining shadows stretching into monstrous shapes across my ceiling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something lurked just beyond the corners of my vision, something watching. In those early years, I dismissed it as a trick of my imagination, a child's fancy meant to keep me awake. But over time, those fanciful fears matured into a waking nightmare, a relentless reminder that I was never quite alone. I still remember the night that changed everything, a night seared into my memory with the precision of a scalpel. I was 16, an age when the world should have been filled with the thrill of possibility, yet I was crippled by a terror I couldn't name. I had always been afraid of the dark, so much so that I insisted on sleeping with a light on. My room was a sanctuary of illuminated safety, a small lamp in the corner, the flicker of the television casting shadows against the walls. I'd grown accustomed to the gentle hum of the television in the background, a steady reassurance that the night was not a void waiting to swallow me whole. That particular evening was neither unusually warm nor bitterly cold. It was the kind of night that straddles the line between spring and fall. I lay in bed, my eyes heavy with the anticipation of sleep, when suddenly my mother appeared in the doorway. Without a word, she reached over and switched off the TV and the bedside lamp, plunging the room into a darkness that felt far too immediate, far too palpable. The only light came from the weak glow of a street lamp filtering through a window left ajar. A soft, cool breeze drifted in, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and a distant, almost inaudible buzzing sound that I couldn't quite place. At first, I thought nothing of the open window. I had left it that way for the fresh air. But as I lay there, the buzzing grew louder, a persistent drone that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of my room. My heart began to pound in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as if to signal the arrival of something ominous. Then, without warning, an oppressive paralysis gripped me. I could neither move my arms nor turn my head, as if my body had been rendered completely inert by an unseen force. I remember trying to scream, to call out for help, but no sound escaped my lips. Instead, I was forced into the solitary act of watching, my eyes wide and unblinking, as the world around me warped into a scene of surreal terror. Through the dark haze, I could just make out a door on the right side of the room. As I stared in mute horror, that door creaked open, and a beam of light cascaded into the darkness, washing over me like a merciless flood. In that slice of brightness, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was hard to tell what it was, a person or something altogether different, but the presence was unmistakable, filling the space with a silent, predatory intent. I felt as if I were suspended in time, locked in a moment of pure dread. The light intensified, and I realized I was no longer in my own bed. I was lying on what felt like a cold, metallic surface that sent shivers down my spine with every slight movement of the craft. The surroundings were utterly alien, walls that hummed with a low, mechanical vibration, and a chill that seeped into every pore of my skin. Panic swirled within me, mingling with a paralyzing numbness as the realization dawned. I had been taken, abducted from the only life I had ever known. I remember nothing of the intervening moments, only the sensation of drifting, of being moved along by some indifferent, calculating force. When I finally regained control of my faculties, I found myself lying on the floor of my room. The remnants of the cold metallic bed were scattered around, a disjointed puzzle of memories and sensations that left me feeling as if I were waiting for something inevitable to happen. I had the distinct impression that I was in a queue, a reluctant participant, waiting for my turn to be plucked from the ordinary flow of life. It was as though my abduction had been a mistake, a miscalculation in a series of experiments I never consented to participate in. In the weeks that followed, I became haunted by a persistent dread, a feeling that I was being followed, that something was always lurking at the periphery of my existence. I began to notice other, subtler signs. There were moments when I'd be in bed at night, convinced that I felt an icy touch brush the back of my neck. On those occasions, a cold electric prick would surge along my spine, and without understanding why, I would start reciting the Our Father in a desperate bid to ward off whatever malignant force was intruding into my space. The words became a shield, a prayer repeated over and over until the invasive presence receded and I could finally breathe again. For nearly a decade after that harrowing night, the overt abductions ceased. Life, as disjointed and anxiety-ridden as it had become, settled into a sort of uneasy normalcy. I managed to carve out a semblance of routine, punctuated by moments of unexplainable fear that would sometimes surge from the depths of the night. But nothing could fully erase the memory of that chilling encounter. It was etched into my very being, a reminder that I was never alone, that the dark held secrets too vast and terrifying for the human mind to fully comprehend. Yet, even as I began to convince myself that those days were behind me, the darkness found new ways to intrude. About a year ago, I experienced an event that defied all attempts at rational explanation. I was lying in bed, the room dimly lit by the faint glow of a nightlight I had left on as a precaution. The air was still, thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I remember feeling a subtle shift, as if the atmosphere had suddenly become charged with an unseen energy. Then came the sound, a series of barks, sharp and abrupt, slicing through the silence like shards of glass. The noise was jarring, and at first I thought it was a stray dog outside. But these were not the barks of any creature I had ever heard. They were guttural, almost animalistic, yet strangely mechanical. It was as if someone or something was trying to communicate in a language that only a beast would understand, a series of barks that resonated with a disquieting urgency. Before I could gather my thoughts, the familiar paralysis seized me once more. I was unable to move, my limbs frozen as if encased in ice. Desperation welled up inside me, and with every ounce of strength I could muster, I began to recite the Our Father. The words, once a comfort, now fell from my lips like a lifeline thrown into a swirling sea of terror. I repeated them until the oppressive paralysis began to ebb, until I could finally feel my muscles twitch and stir with the promise of movement. And then, just as abruptly as it had come, the paralysis lifted, and I found myself alone in my room, the echoes of that unearthly bark lingering in the corners of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that these experiences were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern, a dark continuum that had followed me since childhood. When I was younger, I had believed that my home was haunted by ghosts, that spectral figures flitted through the halls in the dead of night. But now, as an adult trying to piece together the fragments of my terror, I am no longer convinced that it was merely a haunted house. Something else was at work, something far more sinister and otherworldly. The more I tried to rationalize, the more I found myself trapped in a web of contradictions. Every night, the simple act of closing my eyes became an invitation for the unimaginable. I began to keep a journal, meticulously recording every instance of inexplicable phenomena. The times I felt a cold touch, the moments when the TV flickered with static that seemed to carry messages in a language I couldn't decode, the bizarre barks that punctuated the silence. I wrote down the exact times, the precise weather conditions, the angle of the window, anything that might anchor these experiences in the realm of reality. I'd spend hours poring over these entries, searching for a pattern, a clue that might reveal the truth behind my nightmares. And what I discovered was both maddening and terrifying. The incidents were not random, they were orchestrated, measured out with a precision that defied human logic. There were intervals of calm, periods where the terror lay dormant, only to erupt again with a force that left me breathless and questioning my sanity. One autumn evening, as the wind rattled the bare branches outside my window and the world beyond my walls seemed to dissolve into a haze of orange and red, I sat by the fireplace trying to reclaim a semblance of normalcy. The fire crackled softly, its warm glow a stark contrast to the chill that clung to my heart. I thought I had managed to put the worst of it behind me. That is, until I noticed a faint, pulsating light near the corner of the room. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the firelight, an afterimage or a reflection from a passing car. But as the minutes ticked by, the light grew steadier, its hue shifting from a pale green to a more unsettling, electric blue. I tried to focus on it, to rationalize it away, but my skin crawled with a primal dread. My eyes flicked toward the corner, and for a brief, eternal moment, I could swear I saw a shadow move, like a figure standing silently, observing me from the darkness. I sat frozen, heart pounding in my chest, as the figure remained motionless. There was no sound, no indication of its presence aside from the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of fabric against the backdrop of the fire's roar. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light dimmed, and the figure vanished, leaving me in a silence that felt heavier than the darkness itself. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that the strange occurrences were simply the product of an overactive imagination, a mind haunted by its own demons. I told myself that the late-night recitations of prayer were nothing more than reflexive acts born out of fear. But the memories wouldn't fade. Each time I closed my eyes, I was transported back to that night when I was 16, to the metallic chill of that unknown craft, to the blinding beam of light and the faceless figure standing in the doorway. There was one incident in particular that has remained vivid in my mind, an encounter that defies explanation even now. It happened on a night much like that first terrifying experience, an evening marked by an eerie calm and a subtle shift in the air. I was in my childhood bedroom, the one with the small window that had always been my portal to the outside world. The curtains were drawn, leaving the room in a shadowy half-light, when suddenly I felt it again, that overwhelming, suffocating paralysis. My body became a stone statue, every muscle frozen as if locked in a silent scream. I could feel my mind teetering on the edge of lucidity and oblivion. The darkness around me seemed to pulse with a malevolent rhythm, and then I heard it. The buzzing sound, louder and more insistent than ever before. It filled the room, vibrating through the floor and shaking the very foundations of my sanity. In the midst of this sensory overload, I saw a door materialize on the far side of the room. Its surface was unlike any door I had ever seen. A seamless panel of what looked like smooth, dark metal, with no handle or obvious means of entry. As the door swung open, a beam of light erupted, illuminating the room in a harsh, unearthly glow. I could see, with agonizing clarity, the outline of a figure standing just beyond the threshold. It was not human. The features were too distorted, too abstract. There was something deeply alien about its presence, something that made my skin crawl. In that frozen moment, I felt as though I were being examined, cataloged, and perhaps even judged by a force far beyond my understanding. Time lost all meaning. Seconds stretched into an eternity as I lay there, helpless, my mind screaming in silent terror. When the light finally receded and the door slid closed as if it had never been there, I was left alone in the oppressive darkness of my room. The paralysis slowly lifted, and I managed to force myself into a sitting position, my body trembling with residual fear. I spent the rest of the night in a state of anxious vigilance, unable to shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped an encounter that would have changed me forever. Over the years, these episodes have ebbed and flowed like the tides, each one leaving behind scars, both visible and those etched deep within my psyche. The most recent occurrence, with the strange barking sound and the overwhelming buzzing, felt like a resurgence of that old terror. It was as if the entities that had once visited me were reasserting their presence, reminding me that no matter how much time passes, I remain their unwitting subject. Now, as I sit here in the dim glow of my solitary lamp, I can't help but wonder what these experiences truly mean. I've spent countless nights poring over my notes, searching for any clue that might offer a semblance of explanation. I've consulted books, scoured the internet, and even tried to engage with others who claim to have had similar encounters. Yet, each story only deepened the mystery. Some speak of extraterrestrial beings, of abductions orchestrated by advanced civilizations, while others dismiss the experiences as the hallucinations of a troubled mind. I'm left to grapple with a truth that is as elusive as it is terrifying. There are moments when I long for the comforting embrace of normalcy, the simple act of falling asleep without the ever-present threat of an otherworldly force reaching out from the dark. But even in those fleeting moments of false relief, I am haunted by the memory of that beam of light, by the sensation of cold metal against my skin, and by the echo of an alien bark that still reverberates in my mind. The line between reality and nightmare has blurred, leaving me suspended in a perpetual state of fear and uncertainty. I try to maintain a semblance of routine during the day. I go to work, I meet with friends, and I even attempt to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Yet, behind every smile lies a heart that beats with the dread of the coming night. I've learned to live with the knowledge that my life is not my own, that it is, in some inexplicable way, intertwined with forces that defy human understanding. Every night, as I close my eyes and brace myself for sleep, I am aware that somewhere in the vast darkness beyond, those entities are watching, waiting for the moment when they can reassert their control. I often wonder if I will ever truly be free of this relentless torment. Will there come a day when the buzzing fades, when the cold metal no longer chills my bones, when I no longer hear that unnerving bark echoing through the corridors of my mind? Or am I destined to be a perpetual outsider, a solitary witness to the cosmic horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of human perception? As I write these words, I can almost feel the familiar presence creeping at the edges of my consciousness. The subtle shift in the air, the almost imperceptible vibration that heralds the approach of something unknown. The memories of that long-ago night at 16 mingle with the more recent episodes, forming a tapestry of fear that is as intricate as it is inescapable. Each encounter, each moment of paralysis, each inexplicable sound is a reminder that the darkness holds secrets too vast and ancient for us to comprehend. I do not claim to have all the answers. I do not know why I was chosen or if I was chosen at all. Perhaps I was simply an unwitting observer, a random casualty in a cosmic experiment that spans dimensions beyond our own. Or maybe there is something about me, a quirk of fate, a defect in my DNA, that makes me particularly susceptible to their intrusions. All I know is that I have been marked, in ways both physical and spiritual, by the encounters that have punctuated my life. Tonight, as the wind moans outside and the distant hum of a car engine drifts through the night, I sit alone with my thoughts and the ever-present fear that I am not truly alone. In the silence of my room, with only the faint residual glow of the street lamp outside, I wait. I wait for the familiar signs. A sudden drop in temperature, the soft buzz of an otherworldly sound, the indescribable feeling that my consciousness is slipping away. I wait, not knowing if it will be tonight or some other night, if it will be a fleeting moment of terror or a prolonged ordeal that will shake me to my core. In these quiet hours, I sometimes close my eyes and let my mind wander back to that night of my 16th birthday. I remember the feeling of being utterly powerless, the terror that gripped me as I lay paralyzed on that cold, unyielding surface. I remember the beam of light, the indescribable presence at the door, and the overwhelming sensation that I was not alone in that moment, that I was being observed, dissected, and cataloged by forces beyond human comprehension. And I remember the desperate, frantic recitation of the Our Father, a prayer that I clung to as if it were the only barrier between me and the abyss. Even now, decades later, those memories haunt me. They lurk in the recesses of my mind, a dark undercurrent that threatens to resurface at any moment. I have come to accept that my life is a tapestry woven with threads of fear and uncertainty, that the dark holds more than just the absence of light. It holds a presence, a force that is as ancient as the stars and as indifferent as the void. There are nights when I almost find solace in the thought that these encounters might one day cease, that I might finally reclaim the right to sleep without dread. But then I remember the unexplainable moments, the inexplicable barks, the cold prick on the back of my neck, the sensation of being touched by something not of this world. And I realize that the darkness is eternal. It is a constant companion, a reminder that the universe is vast and full of mysteries that defy human logic. I do not write these words with the expectation that someone will fully understand or believe my experiences. Instead, I write them as a record, a testament to the fact that I have seen things that no one else has, that I have endured encounters that have left indelible marks on my soul. It is a chronicle of fear and survival, of the struggle to maintain one's sanity in the face of an indifferent cosmos that sees us as nothing more than fleeting experiments. Now, as I glance toward the window and notice the gentle sway of the trees in the night breeze, I feel that old, familiar stirring of dread. I know that somewhere in the darkness, those entities are waiting, watching, studying, perhaps even planning their next move. And though I try to convince myself that I am safe, that I have grown strong enough to withstand their intrusions, a small, unyielding voice inside me whispers otherwise. I have learned to live with the knowledge that every night, as I lie in the half-light of my room, I am vulnerable. I am exposed to the whims of forces that operate beyond the realm of human understanding, and as much as I long for the simple comfort of an ordinary night's sleep, I also know that the darkness holds secrets that will forever remain out of reach, secrets that I have been forced to witness. So I continue to wait. I continue to document, to pray, and to live with the ever-present fear that my life is not my own. The dark is not a passive absence of light, but a living, breathing entity that envelops me in its cold embrace. And in those moments when I feel its grip tightening around me, when I hear the distant buzz or the uncanny bark echo through the silence, I am reminded that I am, and always will be, a reluctant participant in something vast and unknowable. As the night deepens and I sit alone with my memories and my fears, I can only hope that one day the mystery will unravel. If not for my sake, then for the sake of understanding the true nature of the darkness that has haunted me since childhood. Until then, I remain vigilant, a solitary witness to the inexplicable, a chronicler of moments that defy explanation, and every time the wind whistles through the window or the night grows unnaturally still, I brace myself for the inevitable return of that otherworldly presence, knowing that in the vast, indifferent cosmos, I am never truly alone. In the end, perhaps it is not the darkness that terrifies me, but the knowledge that something out there, beyond the veil of our comprehension, has marked me, tethering me to a fate I cannot escape, and as I close my eyes tonight, I will once again whisper the words of the Our Father, hoping that they might serve as a small beacon of light against the overwhelming shadows that surround me. Redditor 3. I remember that night as if it were etched into my very soul, a night when the veil between worlds seemed impossibly thin, when the ordinary transformed into something dark and unexplainable. I was 8 years old, small and wide-eyed, and the memory is as vivid now as it was then. My parents, ever the cautious ones, had removed the light from my room, insisting that darkness was good for sleep. So instead of curling up in bed, I had taken refuge on the narrow landing at the top of the stairs, clutching a dog-eared book that promised adventure and escape. The hallway was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, its weak light casting long, distorted shadows along the carpeted floor. I sat cross-legged on the cool wooden banister, absorbed in my book, when something unexpected caught my attention. At the far end of the hallway, near the doorway that led to the family room, I saw a figure. At first I thought it was just one of those shadows, an odd shape molded by the interplay of light and darkness. But as I continued to read, the outline grew clearer, taking on details that no shifting shadow should have. There, standing in the doorway, was a man. He was impossibly tall, about 6 feet, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, complete with a white shirt and a sleek black tie. His skin was a deep ebony, and his face was obscured in shadow, yet I could still detect a certain uncanny precision in his features. I froze, heart pounding so loudly I could almost hear it. The man made no move at first. He simply stood there, silent and unmoving, as though he were waiting for something. I felt an inexplicable chill ripple through me, my small body reacting to a presence I could neither understand nor challenge. I remember the details with a clarity that defies explanation. The way his eyes, dark and impenetrable, seemed to fix on me, the slow, deliberate cadence of his movement as he began to walk toward me, and the strange, almost hypnotic calm that exuded from him. It was as if time had slowed down, each step measured and precise, his feet making no sound against the carpet as he moved. As he advanced, the air in the hallway thickened, and the silence became oppressive. I tried to focus on my book, hoping that the words on the page might offer some distraction from the terror building within me, but the figure's presence was too strong, too compelling to ignore. I could see that his movement was eerily smooth, like a slow-motion dance. And with each step, my fear mounted. Then, when he came to within about 1.5 feet of where I sat, something utterly impossible happened. He vanished. In that split second, as if swallowed by the darkness itself, the figure disappeared without a sound, leaving me alone with nothing but the echo of my racing heartbeat. I sat there, paralyzed by shock and disbelief. For what felt like an eternity, I remained frozen, my mind struggling to process the inexplicable. It wasn't until after the figure had vanished that the horror fully dawned on me. The absence of his presence was more terrifying than his appearance had been. An unsettling void where something should have been. I scrambled off the banister and hurried down the stairs, my small feet slapping against the wooden steps as I sought refuge in the familiarity of my mother's presence. Bursting into the kitchen, I nearly tripped over the worn rug as I reached her side. With a trembling voice that I can still hear echoing in my memory, I blurted out the only question that seemed to make sense in that moment. "Mom, do black people have fat lips?" I remember her startled expression and the way her eyes widened with a mixture of concern and confusion. I was too young to know how bizarre or inappropriate my question might sound in any other context, but in that moment, it was the only detail that had registered in my terrified mind, the slight difference I'd noted in the man's features compared to my own. My mother, trying to soothe me and dismiss my fears, gently explained that I was just imagining things and that it was time for bed. She didn't probe further, and I was tucked in, my mind still churning with unanswered questions. For years afterward, I carried that memory like a scar, an indelible mark that would shape my understanding of the world. In the quiet moments of childhood wonder and terror, I wondered if what I had seen was a ghost, a visitor from another dimension, or something altogether alien. The house itself began to whisper of strange happenings, unexplained noises, fleeting shadows that moved where no one should be. These were the hints of a presence that seemed to dwell in the hidden corners of our home. My father, a pragmatic man with a mind rooted firmly in the world of science and reason, developed a theory. He claimed that our house was somehow a nexus, a thin spot, between worlds where things from another realm occasionally bled through into ours. He would say that sometimes, by accident, something would pass into our reality, a mere misplacement in the fabric of our existence. It wasn't long before my own experiences became intertwined with this theory. Over the years, other inexplicable occurrences plagued our home. My mother, initially dismissive of my story as a child's overactive imagination, began to experience her own encounters. A few months after that fateful evening, she recounted to me in a hushed tone how one night, as she was closing up the living room, she saw a faint outline of a figure in the mirror, a fleeting shape that vanished as soon as she tried to focus on it. It was enough to shatter her skepticism and bind our shared terror together. As I grew older, I could not help but notice that despite the endless cascade of unexplainable events, there was one room in our house that seemed curiously immune to the darker manifestations. My own room. The one that, in a strange twist of fate, now occupied the very space where that black-suited figure had seemingly spawned. In a house haunted by inexplicable phenomena and eerie apparitions, my room was the safest, the one place where the shadows felt less oppressive, where the air was somehow less charged with the tension of the unknown. I've often wondered why that is. Perhaps it is the residual imprint of that long-vanished figure, a lingering trace that marks the space as one of transition between worlds, a sort of buffer zone where the energies of the unseen are neutralized. Or maybe it is simply that my own intense fear and the constant vigilance it demanded created a psychological barrier, a fortress of the mind that repelled the encroaching darkness. Whatever the reason, I've found solace in that small, unassuming room. It is there that I've spent countless nights poring over old journals and dusty photographs, trying to piece together the puzzle of our family's haunted history. Sometimes, when the night is at its darkest and the silence seems to hum with secrets, I can almost feel his presence again. Not in the overt, paralyzing way that I experienced as a child, but as a subtle, almost benign reminder that the boundaries between our world and something else are thinner than we might like to believe. I lie in bed and listen to the soft creaks of the house settling, the distant murmur of the wind outside, and I wonder, is it just the house? Or is there something more? In those moments, I can almost see him, tall, silent, and cloaked in mystery, standing at the threshold of another reality. The more I studied the peculiarities of our home, the more I began to see a pattern. It wasn't just random incidents of apparitions or unexplained sounds. There was a method to the madness, a deliberate, almost scientific rhythm to the occurrences. My father's theory, as outlandish as it sounded at the time, began to hold weight. He argued that our house was built on a site where the fabric of reality was unusually thin, where the barrier between our world and some other unfathomable dimension was frayed. In such a place, entities from that other realm might inadvertently slip through, as if carried on a gust of wind or manifested by the lingering echoes of a long-forgotten history. I remember one particularly stormy night, decades after that first encounter, when the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls and the rain battered the windows with relentless fury. I had locked myself in my room, seeking refuge in its supposed safety, when a sound, soft and insistent, drew my attention to the doorway. At first, I dismissed it as nothing more than the wind playing tricks on my senses. But then, much like the figure from my childhood, a shape began to form in the darkness beyond the door. It moved with a deliberate slowness that sent a shiver down my spine, each step measured and purposeful. I lay there, heart pounding, frozen in a state of half-sleep and terror. The figure did not speak, nor did it approach with any apparent malice. It simply stood there, as if waiting for me to acknowledge its presence. I remember the precise moment when it reached the threshold of my vision, a moment of suspended time where everything seemed to hang in balance, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it faded away into the darkness, leaving me with the overwhelming sense that I had once again been granted a brief glimpse into a world that should have remained hidden. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice more subtle signs of the presence that haunted our home. Small objects would move ever so slightly from one place to another. A book that was on my desk in the morning would be found on the windowsill by afternoon. A chair would be subtly repositioned without explanation. I developed an almost compulsive habit of checking every corner of the house, half expecting to see that tall, silent figure watching me from a doorway or lingering and always I felt it, that deep-seated knowledge that our world was not as complete as it appeared, that there were layers of existence overlapping in ways that defied common sense. My mother's experiences continued to compound my own fears. I recall one evening when she sat me down, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and wonder. She recounted how, one night while she was alone in the living room, she had heard soft, almost melodic humming coming from the direction of the staircase. As she rose to investigate, she felt a cold, inexplicable presence brush against her arm. When she turned, there was nothing there, only the lingering echo of that eerie melody, as if a song from another time and place had briefly graced our home. It was moments like these that solidified my belief that our experiences were not isolated events, but part of a larger tapestry of inexplicable occurrences that connected us to realms beyond our understanding. Over the years, I have delved into books on the paranormal, combed through folklore about haunted houses, and even met others who claimed to have encountered beings from another world. Yet no theory or explanation has ever come close to capturing the full horror and wonder of what I experienced as a child. I have learned that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, that the truth of the universe is often stranger and more elusive than the neat boxes of science or rationality can contain. There are times when I sit by the window of my room, the very space that, in a strange twist of fate, is said to be the place where that enigmatic man first appeared, and I feel a profound sense of both safety and sorrow. It is as if the very air in this room carries with it a promise, a silent assurance that even amid the inexplicable, there is a refuge, a sanctuary, where one can find a semblance of order in a chaotic world. And yet, every so often, a sudden draft or the faintest sound of footsteps in the corridor reminds me that the boundary between safety and the unknown is razor thin. My nights are often punctuated by a restless vigilance. Even as an adult, I have not forgotten the terror of that first encounter. I have learned to live with it, to accept that my life has been indelibly marked by forces beyond my control. I keep a journal where I record every unusual occurrence, every inexplicable noise or fleeting glimpse of something that should not be there. I write down the dates, the times, the temperature, and every detail I can muster, hoping that one day these fragments of terror might coalesce into an explanation, or at the very least serve as a record of the truth that has haunted me all my life. Sometimes, when the house is utterly still and the only sound is the soft ticking of the clock, I feel a presence behind me, a gentle pressure on my shoulder or a whisper that brushes past my ear. In those moments, I turn slowly, half expecting to see that familiar silhouette, that figure in the black suit, his presence as calm and unnerving as it was that long-ago night. But more often than not, there is nothing there, only the lingering memory of a face that I have tried so hard to forget, yet which remains indelibly imprinted on my psyche. Even as I strive to make sense of these experiences, I am left with more questions than answers. Was that figure a ghost, an alien visitor, a manifestation of my own overactive imagination? Or perhaps, as my father theorized, was it something that had slipped through from another world, a stray remnant of a reality that runs parallel to our own? The uncertainty is both maddening and strangely comforting, a reminder that the universe is vast and filled with mysteries that defy explanation. Now, in the quiet moments of the night, as I lie in the sanctuary of my room, the room that seems, against all odds, to repel the darker forces of our home, I find a bittersweet peace in the knowledge that I have borne witness to something extraordinary. I have seen things that most would dismiss as mere hallucinations or the fanciful creations of a troubled mind. But I know the truth. I know that in the shadows of the hallway, in the silence of an empty room, there exists a doorway to another realm. A realm where the rules of our reality do not apply, where beings from beyond can wander free, if only for a fleeting moment. And so I continue to live with this duality, the terror of the unknown and the quiet comfort of having survived it. My life is a tapestry woven with threads of fear, wonder, and the unyielding mystery of what lies beyond. I have come to accept that some questions will never be answered, that some truths are meant to remain shrouded in darkness, much like the figure who once walked silently toward me on that fateful night. Each time I close my eyes, I am transported back to that moment on the staircase, that moment when I first encountered the inexplicable. I see the black-suited figure in all his silent, surreal majesty, and I feel the weight of a universe that is far larger, far stranger than any child's imagination could ever fathom. And though the terror of that memory has faded into a dull ache over the years, it still lingers at the edges of my consciousness, a constant reminder that the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary is thinner than we dare to believe. In the end, perhaps it is not the darkness itself that I fear, but the knowledge that it is alive, that it breathes and moves in ways that defy our understanding. And though my room, this small haven in the midst of chaos, remains the safest place in the house, I know that the mysteries that haunt our home are never truly at bay. They lurk in the peripheries of my vision, in the soft whispers of the wind, in the quiet moments just before sleep takes hold. As I sit here now, pen in hand and heart heavy with the weight of memories, I can't help but wonder if one day the mysteries will unravel. Perhaps I will finally find the answers that have eluded me for so long, or perhaps, like so many other truths of this world, they will remain forever hidden in the folds of darkness. A secret shared only between me and the silent presence that has followed me since that first terrifying night. Until that day comes, I will continue to record my experiences, to cling to the fragments of a reality that seems both intimately familiar and unsettlingly alien. I will live with the knowledge that my life is intertwined with forces beyond comprehension, that the boundary between worlds is fragile and ever-shifting. And as I drift off to sleep each night in the one room that seems to hold back the chaos of our haunted house, I will whisper a quiet prayer. A prayer for protection, for understanding, and for the hope that one day I might finally lay these ghosts to rest. For now, the darkness is my constant companion, the quiet keeper of secrets that I am too frightened yet too curious to uncover. And every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the trees outside my window, serves as a reminder that even in the safety of my sanctuary, I am never truly alone. Redditor 4. I've never been one to believe in coincidences, but that day at the lake still haunts me with the clarity of a half-remembered nightmare. I was 24, a time when the world still seemed vast and mysterious, and my father and I had decided to spend a sunny afternoon bank fishing at a secluded Northern California lake nestled in the Sierras. The day was impossibly beautiful, a perfect cloudless sky reflected in the glassy surface of the water, surrounded by towering cedars that whispered ancient secrets with every breeze. I remember the air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and the gentle lapping of the water against the bank provided a steady, calming rhythm to our quiet conversation. We had found a comfortable spot along the water's edge, our fishing lines cast into the lake as we settled into a companionable silence. I was absorbed in the simple pleasure of waiting, watching the sunlight dance on the ripples of the water, when a subtle disturbance began to unfurl in the periphery of my senses. It started as a vibration, a deep resonant hum that seemed to seep up from the very ground beneath us. My father and I exchanged curious glances, the question unspoken yet clearly shared between us: what was that noise? At first, we both tried to dismiss it as nothing more than the wind or the distant rumble of some machinery hidden among the trees. But the sound grew in intensity, as if something massive was moving deliberately over the treetops behind us. The vibration wasn't like anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't the gentle hum of a passing car, nor the flutter of leaves in the breeze. It was a slow, insistent pulse that resonated deep within my bones. The cedars, tall and proud, shuddered ever so slightly, as though straining under the weight of an unseen presence. I remember the moment vividly. We were standing at the edge of our little sanctuary, eyes fixed on the horizon, when that mysterious noise began its advance. It was as if the sound itself was a harbinger, a portent of something vast and impossible. My heart pounded as I strained to catch a glimpse of what might be approaching. I saw a flicker, a blur of motion among the green silhouettes of the trees. And then, before I could process what was happening, an overwhelming disorientation seized me. The next thing I knew, my father and I were walking back to our vehicle, our steps slow and measured, as if we were trudging through molasses. The sunlight had all but vanished, and an oppressive darkness had swallowed the landscape. It was as if the hours between that moment and our return had slipped away without a trace, a maddening void of missing time that left nothing but the echo of that strange vibration in our minds. We said nothing on the walk back, each of us lost in our own perplexing thoughts and fears. For years after that day, the memory of what had occurred lay dormant at the edge of my consciousness. I tried to chalk it up to an overactive imagination or some bizarre natural phenomenon, but the nagging sense of unease never left me. Then, one evening, my father, quiet and serious, asked me if I had ever seen what made that noise over the trees. His voice was laced with a subtle urgency that made my skin crawl. I recounted the incident exactly as it had happened, including the chilling detail of the missing time. I told him I hadn't seen anything definitive, only felt the relentless pulse of that unknown force. In the years that followed, his questions came more frequently, each inquiry pressing a little harder on the raw nerve of my own curiosity and dread. It wasn't long before I found myself delving into research on phenomena like missing time, a concept that until then I had only encountered in whispered accounts and dubious articles on the fringe of paranormal studies. The more I read, the less convinced I became that our experience could be attributed to anything mundane, like a misfiring weather balloon or a trick of acoustics. There was something more sinister at work, something that defied rational explanation. I couldn't rest until I knew the truth, not just for my own peace of mind, but for my father's as well. We needed closure for that day, a definitive understanding of what had taken us from the light and plunged us into an inexplicable darkness. After much deliberation and sleepless nights spent poring over fragmented texts and obscure reports, I made the decision to undergo hypnosis regression. I wanted to revisit that day, to dig deep into the recesses of my memory and retrieve the details that had been buried beneath layers of conscious amnesia. The session was arranged with a therapist who specialized in these kinds of events. To ensure that my recollections wouldn't be inadvertently influenced by suggestion, I insisted on bringing a close friend along, someone who could film the entire session, providing a record of my words and ensuring that I was guided purely by my own memories. I was terrified of what I might uncover, yet I felt compelled to know exactly what had happened that day in the Sierras. The first session was a nerve-wracking plunge into the depths of my mind. I sat in a dimly lit room, the only sound being the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the floorboards. My eyes closed, and the therapist's soothing voice guided me into a state of deep relaxation. I could feel myself slipping away from the present, drifting into a space where memories mingled with emotions and sensations I couldn't quite name. And then, as if by magic, the scene unfolded before me with an unsettling clarity. I saw the lake, the towering cedars swaying in the gentle breeze, and the fishing boat, our quiet refuge in the midst of nature's splendor. But then the hum began again, low and resonant, a sound that vibrated through the very core of my being. I saw the trees tremble as the noise approached, felt the air thicken with a presence that was at once both ancient and malevolent. I remember the moment when the unknown force came into view. It was not an object, at least not in any conventional sense. It was more like a ripple in the fabric of reality, a distortion in the light, a wavering shadow that moved with an eerie deliberation. I felt as if time itself had been warped, stretched thin by the weight of its influence. I recall looking up, straining to see through the pulsating veil of energy, but all I could register was a fleeting image of something massive and ominous. And then, just as abruptly, the sensation of time slipping away, lost minutes, perhaps even hours, overwhelmed me. I found myself pulled back to the present, the details of that crucial moment dissolving into fragments of terror and confusion. I underwent 2 more sessions over the following months, each one dredging up more unsettling details. With every regression, the memory grew more vivid. A dark, swirling vortex of sound and motion, a palpable presence that defied description. I began to piece together the horror. The noise was not merely a sound, it was an active force, a malevolent entity that had invaded our reality for a brief, terrifying moment. It wasn't something extraterrestrial, as one might assume from the missing time and the inexplicable disappearance of daylight. No, the nature of the experience was far more insidious. It was as if a demonic force, a fragment of a dark dimension, had seeped through the boundaries of our world and made its presence known. When I finally shared the full account of my hypnotic regressions with my father, I expected him to dismiss it as the ramblings of an overactive imagination. Instead, his face grew solemn, his eyes haunted by memories I had not heard him speak of in years. He admitted that he too had felt the terror that day, the overwhelming, unnameable dread that had gripped him as he found himself inexplicably drawn away from the light and into a realm of shadows. With a heavy sigh, he confessed that his long-held skepticism had crumbled under the weight of his own recollections. His religious beliefs, once a pillar of comfort and certainty, now seemed to offer no solace against the demonic presence that our experiences had revealed. "I'm sorry," he told me softly, his voice thick with regret. "I dismissed it as something alien, or perhaps just a trick of the mind. But now, I know it was something far worse, a demonic event. I couldn't find any comfort in it back then, and I couldn't let you have to carry that burden alone." His words were a revelation, a bitter pill of acceptance that left me reeling. The demonic interpretation unsettled me deeply, yet there was an undeniable truth in his eyes. Our encounter, once dismissed as an oddity or an aberration, had unfolded into a horror that defied simple explanation. The entity we had unwittingly encountered that day was not an accidental visitor from the stars, but a deliberate incursion from a realm of darkness and despair. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself haunted by both the hypnotic visions and my father's newfound admission. I pored over ancient texts and modern accounts of demonic phenomena, searching for clues that might explain the malevolent force that had intruded upon our lives. I learned of legends and folklore about thin places, areas where the barrier between our world and a darker, more chaotic realm is alarmingly fragile. Some claimed that such places were cursed, marked by an ancient malice that could reach through the veil of reality and snatch unwary souls into a realm of perpetual torment. The memory of that day by the lake became a prism through which I viewed the rest of my life. Even on bright, sunlit days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was lurking just beyond the edge of perception. I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, or hear a strange vibration that seemed to emanate from nowhere in particular. At night, I would lie awake listening to the silence, my mind replaying the hypnotic regressions like a broken record, each session dredging up fragments of terror and regret. My father's transformation was perhaps the most unsettling part of it all. For years, he had been a man of science and practicality, dismissing the unexplainable with a rational, steady resolve. Yet, after our shared experience and the revelations uncovered through my hypnotic sessions, he began to view the world through a lens of fearful resignation. His once unshakable faith in the natural order was now tainted by a grim certainty that there were forces beyond human comprehension. Forces that could invade our reality without warning, leaving behind only fragments of shattered time and lingering dread. One evening, not long after our final session, we sat together in the quiet of our living room. The sky outside was a deep indigo, the first stars timidly appearing against the vast canvas of night. My father's hands trembled slightly as he turned to me, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and a kind of resigned understanding. "I used to believe that everything could be explained," he said, his voice low and measured. "But now, I see that there are things out there that defy explanation, that challenge everything I thought I knew about our world. I've always been a rational man, but I can't deny what we experienced. I'm sorry for dismissing it all those years ago. I never wanted you to feel alone in your memories." I reached out and squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, a small anchor in a sea of darkness. "I don't know what to make of it either," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I know that it happened, and now that we've uncovered the truth, maybe we can finally begin to understand, and perhaps even learn to protect ourselves from whatever that force is." In the months that followed, I continued to document every unusual occurrence, every fleeting memory of that day, in a journal that became both a record and a form of therapy. I visited the lake again, this time alone, and sat by the water's edge beneath the towering cedars. I listened to the wind, hoping to catch even a hint of that terrible vibration, and wondered if the thin barrier between our world and the dark realm had shifted once more. The lake, once a place of serene beauty and quiet reflection, now held an undercurrent of malevolence, a reminder that the demonic presence might yet return. I also delved deeper into research on ancient rituals and protective measures. Some texts spoke of symbols and incantations that could ward off evil, of sacred spaces where the influence of dark forces was held at bay. I experimented with these ideas, trying to create a safe haven within my own home, a sanctuary against the encroaching darkness. I hung protective talismans near the windows, recited prayers late into the night, and even sought the counsel of local spiritual leaders who claimed to have battled similar forces. None of it offered a complete sense of security, but it did help to ease the gnawing dread that had become a constant companion. Yet, despite my efforts, there were nights when sleep eluded me. I would lie in bed, eyes wide open in the darkness, and listen for that familiar hum of impending doom. In those moments, I felt as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next intrusion, a moment when time would slip away again, and I would be forced to confront the terrifying unknown. Sometimes, in the stillness before dawn, I would remember that sunny day by the lake, the light dancing on the water, the crisp, refreshing air, the sound of my father's laughter mingling with the rustle of the cedars. Those memories now seemed like a cruel contrast to the horror that had shattered them, a reminder that beauty and terror can coexist in the same heartbeat. It was a lesson I had learned all too well, that even the most serene moments might hide a darkness just waiting to emerge. Now, as I write these words, I do so with the heavy knowledge that the line between our world and the next is thinner than we care to admit. I often wonder if that demonic presence still lurks out there in the silence of the Sierras, waiting for another chance to slip through the cracks of time. I can't help but feel that our encounter was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger tapestry of inexplicable events, a puzzle with pieces scattered across the hidden corners of our reality. In the quiet moments of reflection, I find solace in the fact that my father and I now share a bond forged in the crucible of that terrible day. Though the weight of our shared secret is heavy, it also unites us in a way that transcends the mundane concerns of everyday life. We have both been forever changed by our brush with the inexplicable, a transformation that has taught us to question, to seek, and to guard our hearts against the encroaching darkness. I sometimes think back to that day, the strange vibration, the missing time, and the slow, inevitable descent into a realm where rationality gave way to terror. And I wonder if perhaps understanding is not the key to protection, but rather the acceptance that some mysteries are meant to remain shrouded in darkness. There will always be forces beyond our control, entities that slip through the cracks of our understanding, leaving behind only echoes of fear and the relentless question, what if they return? As I close this chapter of my recollections, I can only hope that the act of remembering and sharing serves as both a warning and a comfort. A warning that the boundaries of our world are fragile, and a comfort in knowing that even in the face of unspeakable horror, we can find strength in our shared humanity. I carry that lesson with me, a quiet defiance against the darkness, a reminder that while the night may be long and filled with terrors, the dawn is inevitable. And so I continue to live, each day a testament to survival, each night a vigil against the unseen. The memories of that lake, the tall cedars, and the demonic force that stole our time remain etched in my mind, a permanent scar and a constant reminder that our world is far more mysterious and dangerous than it seems. I have learned to embrace the unknown, to navigate the thin spaces between light and shadow, and to live with the enduring question that haunts me. What if the darkness is not content to remain hidden? In the end, perhaps it is not about finding all the answers, but about accepting that some doors once opened can never be closed again. And with that acceptance comes both the terror of what lies beyond and the bittersweet comfort of knowing that even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit endures.